Well, Puppy Turtle, here we go again. Just thought I'd discuss your latest video. Story's taking me a bit, but I wanted to talk about it, plus I've been busy with real life and stuff. Now, I see where you're going with this, and I see why you keep bringing up this probability fallacy. You seem to be under the false impression, or think I'm going by the idea of, just because there could be an alien like you, or technology could create a godlike being, that therefore God doesn't exist. That's not my argument. My argument and my point here is that just because there might be something that looks like a God, acts like a God, does not automatically mean there is. You have to look for other possibilities, other options. And you can't just deny them because of your a priori already beliefs. You believe that there is a God, so therefore you have these weird objections that don't really make a lot of sense. You think they do, which is fine enough for you. But when you say stuff like, why no alien would ever do this, or can't think of any reason for why an alien would do this, what you're really saying is, it goes against my idea of what God and what some things should do, therefore they can't ever go against that. That in itself is a probability fallacy, I'd almost say. You're convinced that, because you don't think it could happen, and there is no possibility or probability of it, therefore it could never happen. So what? It doesn't require our way of thinking. An alien being that's lived for millions of billions of years could be bored, stir crazy and do stupid things just because it could. Maybe it was an experiment. Maybe they were softening up humans for later capture of some kind. Heck, aliens could show up, create a rapture-like event, and Christians over the world would be convinced and be taken up, and and you'd end up with them being taken by aliens that had nefarious reasons for it. Of course, I'm not saying that this could happen or would be true, but again, you're really stuck with this idea that, because you believe in God, therefore, that's the only answer. My problem with God and the problem with you and all these other problems is that if I start accepting it just because it looks like God, then what if it isn't? What if there is no God? What if God doesn't exist? What if, as I believe, there is no afterlife? None of these things. Except believing in these things because you want to isn't going to change these things. And I ask people about this from time to time, and he keeps going back to this. If you're right, God exists. You're right, but how would you prove it? Worse off, if God doesn't exist, if you're wrong about your ideas of God, if you're wrong about all these things, because you only believe and accept it, and don't accept possible alternatives, how would you ever prove you were wrong? How would you ever find out the truth, the ultimate truth? And there's too many problems on this planet and things in this world for us to just automatically blindly accept the idea of God because we want it. Look at gays, look at, religion, look at the damage religion does, look at creationism, look at all these things that are accepted because of God supposedly said it. If God doesn't exist, then all these things are harmful. And they don't move society forward. We can't just accept the idea of God because we want it. We have to look at the alternatives. We have to accept our own shortcomings and accept that, we create these ideas because we want them. God could exist. I'll admit that. But could you ever admit that God may never exist? And could you ever be open to the idea of God never existing? Now, you criticize me for, having the honesty to say that I don't think God could ever prove himself. Though I have thought about an actual way, which would be something like giving me infinite knowledge for a few seconds. Something like that would be hard to fake, knowing everything about the universe and whatnot, every answer, the past, the future, and allow my brain to handle it. That would be a pretty good way of proving to me that there was something beyond my knowledge. Because that would be something that would be even hard, I'd think, for an alien being to be able to do. But could you ever, accept that God doesn't exist? I think you have the same idea that for you, there is nothing that could ever disprove God. And we see it with religion all the time. There is nothing that could disprove God. Because the God becomes God of the gaps. It just shrinks every time. 50 to 100 years ago, you probably would have been arguing for creationism against evolution. You would have been one of those that was using the Bible to prove, and you did as a kid. But you've changed because of the evidence. But it doesn't change the fact that creationism was wrong. And God could be wrong. The idea of God could be just wrong. And if you lived 50, 100 years from now, you could be making the same arguments that God doesn't exist and arguing against Christians that believed in God or Muslims or whatnot. Because the evidence against the need for God grew. I like to quote, or paraphrase, I guess, the quote by Stephen Hawking, where he says, "The universe does not require a God to be created." That does not say that God doesn't exist. But it's stuff like this that says, well, we don't need a God. Therefore, at the very least, God isn't automatically 100% the answer. Before we needed God for the universe to be created. Now we find out that necessarily isn't true. And that creates these problems. Like 50 to 100 years ago, you needed God to create life on this planet in its current form. That's been disproven. Soon we may prove conclusively that God isn't required for abiogenesis. And that's another gap filled. And this is going to keep happening. And that's the problem. Is that science keeps proving that God isn't required for these things. Yet wherever religion has said God is required for something, it almost always gets proven wrong. And the only parts that haven't been proven wrong are the parts we're still working on. And this is the problem. This is what the whole problem with Q is about. It's not saying because Q could exist, God doesn't. It's saying that the possibility of Q existing means that we need to not just automatically assume God exists. We have to look for the evidence. We have to look for other things. You use the possibility fallacy by saying God could exist, therefore he does. Just because something's possible does not make it automatically true. And you do it all the time with God. You do it all the time with your apologetics. All of your apologetics are possibility fallacies that I've seen. Or at least a lot of them, sorry. You say that God has to have a perfect, good reason because he's perfect. Well, that's a possibility fallacy. You assume God could have a reasonable explanation, therefore he does. No. He could be an asshole. It could be something else. You don't automatically get to say because it's possible, therefore it's true. And that's what apologetics is about. It's not about what's plausible. It's about what's possible, ignoring just how plausible the story and event is. That's what I feel about this. Sorry about this long ramble, and sorry for being late again. But, as my unofficial position as the stalker puppy troll, I have to do it. I'm sorry. Nah, I like most of your videos, and I reply because I'm trying to help you, and I find the banter back and forth interesting. I hope if I am stalking, if you want me to stop, I will.